I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 181 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. And I want to ask you today, when is the last time that you can remember that you had to negotiate? And when you've got that image in your mind, I want to ask you, how did you feel? How did you feel in anticipation of that conversation? How did you feel during it? And how did you feel afterward? And I'm willing to bet that somewhere in the range of before, during, or after, you felt uncomfortable. And here's the thing, if the whole idea of negotiating makes you squirm or makes you feel like a fraud or feel incompetent, then this episode is for you. Because I'm talking today with Leigh Thompson. And Leigh is the J.J. Gerber Professor of Dispute Resolution and Organizations in the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. She is essentially an expert negotiator. Her research focuses on negotiation behavior and performance, creativity, and analogical reasoning. And she has done so many cool research projects, which I have geeked out on checking into. They were investigations of gender and the use of ethically questionable negotiation strategies. She looked at embarrassment and pride and their effects on creativity and on how analogical reasoning improves negotiation performance. Now, all that is pretty academic. We're not going to get that academic in this episode, I promise. Instead, we're having a great conversation, but I want you to know that Leigh has published more than 134 research articles on negotiation. She's authored 10 books, including her most recent, Negotiating the Sweet Spot, The Art of Leaving Nothing on the Table, which was published by HarperCollins. She is dynamic. She's funny, she's confident, and she is so good at breaking this down into tactics that we can all apply. In fact, wait till you hear her story about how a simple orange split between sisters changed her whole framework for negotiating. Okay, let's do it. Let's meet Leigh Thompson. Okay, Leigh, welcome to the show. I am so delighted to have you.
I'm very happy to be here.
I love to start with this question when I have a guest. So indulge us and tell us a little bit about how your day today was scheduled. Like, what did you have going on at home and at work?
Well, I'm a hyper scheduled person and I try to make that work to my advantage, but it's absolutely shocking. I have like 3-column lists. I have Post-it notes all over. I'm passionate about doing exercise. And so that always, I try to put that first. Because that's when my body is working. And if I could get
How early do you do that?
Well, this is shocking, but I like to get up at about 5.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's a bad day outside, I'll kind of do an indoor bike. If it's a good day outside, I'll kind of jump on the bike and go outside, try to ride with people. And then I also like to do anything difficult or mentally challenging in the morning. Like if I have to write a book or a chapter or a manuscript, I get that in the morning because I start to deteriorate during the rest of the day.
Wow.
So that's a really good time to do other stuff, kind of a little bit more okay, I just have to, kind of copy and paste some files or something like that. But I'm super organized and I like to front load the day because I just feel better afterwards.
Yeah. And then what do you have after this today?
What I have after this is I am going to teach a 4-hour executive MBA class. So what I've done today is I opened up one of my executive courses. I kind of did a structured coffee chat. Then I did some exercise on my indoor bike. Then I did a 1-hour special negotiation training skills session for a company that I won't name, but they were a lot of fun. And now I'm talking to you. Yeah. And then I'm going to teach a class.
It's going to be a full day on camera for you. Yeah.
Full day.
Uh-huh. Well, I hope you get some downtime tonight. And then what time do you go to bed?
I go to bed embarrassingly early.
Me too.
So if I'm not like in bed by 10, like, oh my gosh, something's wrong, but I can literally feel my mental capacity like disappearing. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm being erased.
Oh, yes. We are twins separated at birth. I think our listeners will know that is my rhythm is between 9 and 10, I want to be in bed. And then I'm up early like you to work out. I think just knowing our own rhythm and what makes our mechanism work the best is so important. And by this point, I'm like unapologetic about it. It's perfectly happy being an early bird. Perfect. So you are an expert on negotiation. And this is the very thing that makes so many people like squirm, right? We get so freaked out about this, much like public speaking, which, I do a lot of and know that it terrifies a lot of people. Negotiating really seems to scare us. And yet we all do it pretty often. Like, how often do we actually negotiate? What have you found?
Well, here's what's interesting. There's one study, I didn't do it, but I love this study. If you ask that question to men, they will say, oh, at least once a week. Women will say, definitely, I did that last month. So, but do I really think that's true? I don't. I think men go around the world coding situations as negotiations. I think women go around the world doing as much or more negotiation, but they aren't coding it that way. If I'm buying a house or buying a car or interviewing for a job, yes, I'm coding it that way. But once I start to say things like, did you talk with your spouse about the childcare today? Did you talk about which one of you is going to do the shopping list at Costco today? Did you talk about who's going to, they'll say, oh my gosh, yes, I had that conversation. So we didn't code it as a negotiation because it wasn't what we call kind of a scripted, I'm buying a car. So we're doing it all the time. We just don't think about it that way.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And my answer would have been, hourly. I feel like I'm constantly in this mix of negotiating. And yet earlier this week, I was talking to one of our coaches on our team about this, and she brought up that there's this difference between persuading and negotiating. So I'll give you the context. We were talking about our kids, and I was saying, I think one of my children is this master negotiator. And as I unpacked the conversation, it really turns out it might be more like persuasion. So what's your point of view on the difference of those two?
Yeah, I think that persuasion is much more about, I am going to try to convince you to adopt my point of view and ideally change your behavior. I need you to do your homework. I need you to go to bed. I need you to do whatever it is. And I'm going to give you either rational arguments if it's one kid, or I'm going to give you some kind of emotional arguments if it's a different kid.
Yes.
But here's what I think about negotiation. Negotiation is much less about persuasion, because the way I think about it is that I already know what's good for me. You already know what's good for you. And I'm probably not going to be successful in changing your mind about that. So the question is, can we, in some sense, reach a win-win? And I can't resist telling you, Cheryl Ann, and the folks who are listening, the story that changed my life. Like literally, I heard this story and like I dropped everything, changed my dissertation topic. And it's so corny. So the story goes like this. There's two sisters. Lots of love, lots of history, lots of future, but there's one orange and they're both fighting for the orange and things are getting emotional. You know what? You've pushed me around your whole life. I want it. I want it. So finally they say, let's preserve our relationship. They cut it exactly in half. They use scientific measurement. One sister takes her half of the orange, squeezes out the juice and throws the peel away. The other sister takes her half, carefully zests the peel to make her famous orange scone recipes, and she throws the juice away. The garbage truck comes and goes. And at that point, they look at each other and say, Cheryl, I never realized that you only wanted the juice and I only wanted the peel, because we were in persuasion mode. You've got to give it to me because I'm deserving. And we were not in learning mode. So to me, negotiation is much more about what assumptions am I making that I need to test? And had they asked some questions instead of just trying to make these arguments, they would have come up with a win-win. Now that's so corny.
It's so great.
But I have developed simulations that contain oranges people cut oranges in half 80% of the time, and they feel like that's win-win. And then I show them there's all kinds of missed opportunities. So to me, that's the difference between persuasion and negotiation. So negotiation is about the only way there's win-win is that I got to learn from you.
Mm-hmm. It's making me think about a phrase I use all the time is context is king. And I'm always saying, boy, we would understand people's behavior so much better if we sought that context and really got them to share what's behind the behavior. In your case, what I'm hearing is what's behind the desire. Like you want the orange, but why? And as soon as I know why you want it, then that I can balance, it can create a much better solution, a much more holistic solution. Fascinating. And I do think, I would now categorize my daughter as an expert persuader, perhaps not yet negotiator. And these negotiations that we're doing, they're split between personal and professional interactions. You were giving us some examples before that are personal. Certainly there's professional interactions. How do those differ? How do we think about them differently?
And what's interesting is that it's not, I'm going to say probably not what you think I'm going to say. The ones that are in business are easier. And most people think, oh my God, no, how can that be? Because it's like money and this and that. Because the ones that are in business are scripted and sanctioned. I'm here to talk to you about my product today. We have a scheduled meeting to talk about this particular, project launch. They're scripted. We can read about them. We rehearse for them. It's like, it's game on. The ones that are personal don't come with the script, but they come with a relationship that we're so afraid of damaging. So what we found is that a lot of people get very uncomfortable in their personal negotiations, and they just, because they're afraid that the other person can't handle it. They have, oh my gosh, she's going to fall apart if I suggest that we go out for a different vacation or whatever it might be. So they're tougher. The emotional stakes are higher. It isn't just about money, and no one says game on.
Right. I keep thinking about the phrase, it's just business, and how often, we were taught like, well, you can almost behave differently if you can pull your emotions out of it and reassure yourself. And you can't do that at home, right? It's not just business. There is a long-term relationship at stake. So I like the phrase, the emotional stakes are higher. It feels like the relationship arguably matters more. Like that relationship isn't going anywhere. So
Right. And so for the ones that occur at home, you don't get a memo saying, okay, you're about to go into a negotiation, take your place at the table. So they catch us off guard too, especially with loved ones. So I have found that I have to do a lot of framing because there is no script. I create a script, which is like, it sounds like we're going to be talking about your spring break trip. To a daughter. It sounds like we're going to be talking about, how we're going to get through this visit from certain people or a certain vacation. And so I will tell you right now, my goal is to come up with a solution that we're both going to feel good about. So kind of framing, but I do have some strong feelings about this. So I'm just going to put it out there. So I think that learning how to do that framing, especially for women, is really important because let's face it, everybody expects us to be nice and accommodating.
Yes.
And if we don't act that way, well, then we have violated, this expectation. Yes. Yeah.
I think that's true. The notion that we believe everyone expects us to be nice. And in fact, they do, right? In fact, that is the societal expectation. Then when you take a harder line or you stand your ground more rigidly, it is less well received, I think, traditionally.
Right.
There's a lot of labels that can get assigned to that if we're not mindful of it in the negotiation. So I want to talk about the sweet spot. So, your book is called Negotiating in the Sweet Spot. And tell us what you mean by that term.
Yeah. And so there's this term that's been around for centuries. It's called win-win. And, but what we found in our research is that when you ask people, well, what does win-win mean? They actually say things like split the difference, meet in the middle, even Steven, and essentially cut the orange in half. So I realized that, oh my gosh, win-win has become kind of this, we both kind of end up with equal shares. Yes, the sisters both got half the orange, but that is not win-win. So the sweet spot is the idea, and it's literally based on that orange story that changed my life, is really based on the idea that maybe there is a way that we can both satisfy our desires, interests, goals here. I want to start an orange juice business. You want to make scones. I mean, and who was to know? But how can we add some tools so that we can find that out quickly before it's too late?
Right.
Because what we found, and this is what shocked me, is that if you look at research studies of how married couples, dating couples, newlyweds negotiate, they do worse than complete strangers.
Wow.
They do worse. That doesn't mean they hate each other, but here's what they do. Oh, honey, that's fine. Yeah, you want to cut it in half? I'm good.
Just give in.
They give in because they don't want to rock the relationship boat. And it's called relational accommodation. It's just not worth it. And they don't want to say, well, I'd really like to think about maybe going to this restaurant. And then they kind of quickly converge on this. So the sweet spot is the idea that how can I have, how could the sisters have had a conversation where they say, well, look, I love you, but let's just talk, about what you ultimately want to achieve. Let's brainstorm. Let's not settle for the first
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I keep going back to that word context. And I think it's so powerful that everything we want is on the other side of that courageous conversation. We get the context onto the table. There's a deeper understanding. It's not just a quick, we're not making assumptions about what we think they want or why we think they want that. That filling in those blanks on our own is dangerous territory.
Right.
And what I'm hearing you say is it might actually make it harder for us to get what we want, right?
That's right.
We don't really have the opportunity to.
That's right. And to your point, one of the things that I measured in a lot of my research is something called a fixed pie perception, which is the idea that, well, whatever I want, you probably want the complete opposite. And it's this fixed pie perception, the belief that the whole is not greater than the sum of the parts. So, and then what we're finding is that most negotiations contain a sweet spot. But I will say one thing, because I think your listeners are saying, well, this doesn't feel like any car I've ever bought. And so I got to come totally clean. If we're just negotiating about price or salary or whatever, if there's just one issue, then it is fixed sum. The minute you have more than one thing going on, we have the potential for an orange. So I had a student in my class who was saying, I am negotiating a job where there's salary, childcare, starting bonus. And so I realized, oh my God, there's an orange.
Yes. That's the thing is when it's a bucket of compensation, right? What's the total package? Now we have an orange. I love this. Oh, I can tell we're all going to be walking around saying, now I have an orange. That's great. That's going to be the best story to land this whole episode. Hey there, have you heard the news? I am going on tour in 2021, virtually, of course. I am so fired up to talk to a ton of you in 2021, and I would love to add your event to our tour schedule. The topic is something near and dear to my heart. It's work-life balance redefined. So if you're hosting an event, a meeting, a conference, a symposium where this topic would be a hit, let's talk. Dates are available on a first-come, first-served basis, and they are going fast. So head over to brilliant-balance.com/tour and get the wheels in motion. I'll see you on the virtual road. You talked about how this is different from the win-win, but to get to this sweet spot, I understand you've developed a number of different hacks. So let's talk about some of these that make it a little easier to get there. What's your favorite overall hack for negotiating?
Well, I think my favorite overall hack, here's what I try, kind of context here is that a lot of people are under the impression, oh my God, negotiation, I have to go to school for 5 years. I have to become some kind of a business, tycoon or something. No. So I've taken kind of some of the psychological principles, economic principles. You could start using these tonight. So one of my favorite hacks is what I call the dessert tray. And I know that sounds crazy, But most people negotiate like they play tennis. I'm going to make you one offer, Cheryl Ann, and then, you can then, and then you say, okay, Leigh, here's my counter offer. Mm-hmm. And then we slowly converge on a middle ground. So in the dessert tray, what I do is I say, I'm going to make you A, B, and C options in the spirit of being open-minded. And you're going to tell me which one. I like all of them equally. Why don't you pick? So the reason why I love that is that rather than us kind of immediately taking sides and converging on a middle ground, we kind of open up the possibilities. And I have an example. It's kind of a business example, but I have a vice president of sales who was dealing with a customer who had threatened to say, I'm going to go to your competitor. I want much better terms. I'm about to leave. And my VP of sales said, I respect that. You can leave if you want. How about I make you an A, B, and a C proposal? And he was trying to sell him like chartered airline, something or other. So he said, they each will contain a price. Each A, B, and C will contain like the number of bookings and amenities. Mm-hmm. I'd be happy with you taking any one of these. And all of a sudden the customer said, okay, well, I really like what you've called number B. So what was really interesting is that he prevented this person from going to a competitor, and he was able to figure out the part of the orange that the customer wanted. Yeah. And he did it kind of what I call the sneaky way. Yes. The sneaky way is that maybe you don't even trust me enough to tell me that you care about the rind or the seeds or the pulp or whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer you a dessert tray where it's just like,
I love this.
And then I can almost reverse engineer what you care about. Mm-hmm. So that's my favorite strategy.
I love it because it reminds me a little bit about pricing analysis of bundles of goods and services. Like I remember in business school looking at, we were talking about the hotel industry and looking at things they could offer for free with a room and trying to figure out which bundle was the most attractive. It has some similarities to that. The idea of
absolutely. Absolutely. And I love the way that you use the word bundle, because the only way this strategy works is that we have to have something else to haggle about besides the price.
The price. Mm-hmm.
There has to be something else. So that's why I said, if there's only one issue, by definition, we got to fix some game.
Yes.
But I think that life is not a fix some game. Usually there's something else.
Yes. And I'm thinking about a personal example. Like if you have a child you're negotiating bedtime with, and you're like 9:00 and they're like 10:00, and the obvious is, well, we'll meet in the middle, but maybe not. Maybe it's 9:00, but with these extras thrown in. I read 2 stories instead of 1. And that's an interesting, I feel like that this idea, this hack of ABC or dessert tray can play out in a lot of different scenarios. So I kind of love that one. What is one, since there's so many of these, what's one that you think is really underused, like people don't think about?
There's a couple that and this was a wake-up call for me. So one of the underused ones is this whole idea of distrust. And the reason why I mention that is that, let's face it, in a negotiation, people by definition kind of feel like, well, how do I know if I can believe you? Right. And so they can start to develop like distrust. And so that's a really negative thing to happen, because if I don't trust you, then I start to shut down. And so anyway, so what's the hack? You can't just snap your fingers and say, oh, just trust people. That's ridiculous. But what you could do to people is say, can you possibly pivot to disappointment? Now, some people are saying, what do you mean pivot to disappointment? Turns out disappointment is what we call a complementary emotion, which means if I express disappointment, oh my gosh, Cheryl Ann, I'm so disappointed. Obviously, what I have prepared as a starting proposal, doesn't seem to have landed that well with you. So you are psychologically hardwired to try to repair the disappointment.
Yes.
And so the reason why I love that is that if I become angry or distrustful, then it kind of creates a spiral. So if you feel distrust, show a little bit of disappointment or suspicion. If you're feeling angry, then try to express it as, gosh, I'm disappointed that this conversation, right? Because what you want to do is you you don't want to get into those, what we
Spiral.
call those reciprocal spiral emotions, because people get emotional in their personal negotiations.
Oh, my wheels are going like 1,000 miles an hour because I can see this both in personal and professional conversations where, you might use the term getting triggered, right? And feeling like this is this emotion that's rising, and the reframe to it, because disappointment almost sounds like personal responsibility.
Right.
Like, I'm disappointed that we didn't get there. It's a much softer, but it feels more personal.
Right.
I'm taking the responsibility,
right.
Versus throwing it back at you.
That's right. And so you don't want to say, gosh, I'm so disappointed in you, because then I sound very patronizing.
That would be inflammatory.
But you could just say, gosh, I'm so disappointed. This conversation is not going the way I wanted it to. The other person is literally hardwired to try to repair that. Like, oh, I think we can figure it out.
Yes.
But it's because anger is, that starts a spiral usually.
It's fascinating. Now, tell me what you think about this. I've heard that when you're trying to get two people to a common ground, that nuance is what's critical, right? So I was hearing this of like two people on diametrically opposed issues to like a really emotional issue, like pro-life, pro-choice, for example. If you give them position papers that are all about one and then all about another, they tend to kind of dig in their heels to their positions. If you give them a position paper that says, this issue is really nuanced, and it's not, by the way, not about the issue they disagree on, a totally separate issue, and they start to see all of the nuance and how complicated it might be, but there is, in fact, some common ground, then when you bring them back to their diametrically opposed issue, they're more like inclined to find that. Are there ways to use not what we're currently negotiating about to help find that sweet spot in this negotiation?
It could be. Now, the examples that you gave of these kind of positions on kind of what we call hot button issues.
Right.
So that's kind of what we call kind of a deep conflict. So in other words, it's not about money. It's not about anything else. I fundamentally think that, women have the right to choose, or whatever my position might be on the subject. To me, that's a very tricky type of negotiation, because usually negotiations have to do with, I am choosing to transact with you. I am choosing to buy and sell a product or service that you might have. And so that's why the example that you mentioned is very tricky. So I will say this, I'm going to try to land this plane. I will say this, there was a famous study that was done. I wish I would have done it. They had people doing a negotiation. And sometimes it was framed, get this, as the Wall Street game.
Okay.
It was actually like a prisoner's dilemma thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes the same thing was framed, here's your context again, as the community game.
See?
Cheryl-Ann, I want to say that these people were doing exactly the same thing. The incentive, but somehow just the framing of Wall Street, okay, I'm going to changed everybody's behavior. Everybody just assumed it's a dog eat dog, cutthroat, everybody out for themselves. So when your question was, is there anything you can do kind of on the front end to kind of help people get through this? In some sense, if you could kind of trigger, or let's use a different word, kind of prime, activate kind of our goal is to create, better understanding in our community or in our group or whatever it might be, that could go a long way. It's like little things can prime us to take things in one of two directions.
It's almost like, I heard it almost as, I want this to work. Like revealing, you and I are going to have a negotiation, revealing upfront, like, hey, I want this to work. I want us to find a way to do this. Is like, that sets the stage for, we're not in this antagonistic debate. Even like I go back to the kind of classic car dealership, like I'd love to buy this car. I want to figure this out. Here's kind of like the stakes and what would have to be true. I think that framing can be so powerful. So what I liked about the example I was sharing is, even though it was a really emotional hot button kind of issue, and I think they had to come to a policy agreement. I think in the context, it was like they had to agree to policy decisions. And so that was why it was so important to set the stage of like, it's nuanced. We're looking for where's the commonality without telling them that's what was happening. They were just given stimulus.
There's one other thing I want to mention. There was a study done several years ago that looked at people who were on different sides of the aisle when it came to, I guess, what should be part of what's called the Western canon. I'm not a high school teacher, but there's kind of a list of books that we feel like all the kids should read. And there were two camps. There were traditionalists who I think wanted things like, I don't know, Shakespeare or Mark Twain or whatever. And then there were, at the time, revisionists who wanted a lot more diversity, people of color. Anyway, what's your point, Leigh? My point is that when you had each side, the traditionalists and the revisionists, make a prediction of the books that the other team wanted, they extremize these people. Yes. They polarize it. So in other words, we go into these negotiations somehow thinking, oh my God, I'm dealing with somebody who's so far to the right, so far to the left. And when you actually look, they had 6 out of 10 books in common. I mean, it was insane. Now, I'm not saying that that's true for all of these hot button policy issues, but what is true is we tend to extremize the other side. And so I kind of go in like this. I go in with my guard up, and, pretty much anything you can and do say will be held against you by me.
Right. So. I use a phrase around here a lot of assume positive intent. And I think that could be a great frame to go into any negotiation. I think a lot of us go in armored up, ready to get hurt. And that may not be the best frame to really reach an end game that we love. I'm curious how power dynamics affect negotiations. Like we're talking a little bit within one of my client groups about our relationships with our parents and our relationships with our children. And those shifting power dynamics over time feel like they're at play in these negotiations. And I think the same would hold true in a workplace or, a bigger company with a smaller company. I can imagine lots of scenarios. How do we think about negotiating when there's a real disparity of the power dynamic?
Kind of interesting because there's 2 points of view about power. One point of view about power is that it's all based on economics, which means that, you know what? Let's suppose you and I are negotiating and you're trying to hire me. And I have 6 other companies that have made me a job offer. That's never happened, but that's my fantasy. In some sense, I have the power because I can say, Cheryl Ann, everybody wants me and you're going to have to beat my 6 competitive offers. That to me is kind of classic economic power. If I'm trying to sell my house in Winnetka, Illinois, and I have no one who's even done a walkthrough, I don't have power because the one buyer, they have, okay, so that's kind of economic power. It's kind of the power of your alternatives. The example that you gave has to do with kind of the generations. That's what we call role power, ROLE, role power, which is, look, if I'm the boss, and you're my direct report, or I'm the new hire and you're the senior vice president, or I'm the parent, somebody else is the child, I have role power over you. And so I might not even have a lot of alternatives, but there's kind of a assumption that this is kind of how we get along. Now, what's interesting is that there can be cultural differences there. And I'm mentioning that because you and I have probably both seen situations. I know I have where the young Westerner, God love them, comes into the negotiation. They have their Excel sheets. They're the smartest person in the room. They do not respect the person on the other side of the table who is an elder or whatever it might be. They might not have a snazzy Excel sheet, but they are not respecting the role power this person has. So I'm not giving you a direct answer to your question, but I think that that's the heartbreak of most parents is we like to think, I'm the elder. Why aren't you showing me any kind of respect? Because that kid has figured out, I know mom wants to go to bed at 9 because she falls apart like a pumpkin. And I have tools that I can make her life miserable right now because I want to, stay up and use my iPhone. I want to, do whatever I'm going to do. And so that's where things get tricky.
Yes. So there's a difference between role power disparity and economic power disparity kind of in the discussion. Correct. And I think that's an important nuance that, I as a parent, I always think about. It's not just do what I say because I say it. I think I'm trying to earn their respect through having a rationalization for a rationale for any point of view that I'm holding. And I feel like it is incumbent on me to substantiate that. Otherwise, they don't have any buy-in. Then what happens when I'm not there dictating the response? I want them to have buy-in to the why behind it. So fascinating how power plays into negotiations. I want to make sure that our listeners know where to find you and your work online, especially your books, any other resources. Where's the best place to find them?
Great. The best place to find it is to join me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find. Leigh Thompson, Kellogg School of Management. I regularly post links to completely open source videos. I actually have a video series called Negotiation 101. And awesome. And there's 4 different segments. And if you listen to all of them, you will have spent less than an hour of your life. So I have that. I have some videos on what tips for women at the negotiation table, because fascinating, depressing research, but there's some tricks of the trade, so to speak. So definitely join me on LinkedIn, and I will post a lot of things. And this is my book, Negotiating the Sweet Spot. That's pretty easy to get on Amazon. Actually, one of the negotiations, and I'm going to stop talking, one of my biggest, most important negotiations, Shirley, is that when this book was coming out, we were literally going into lockdown. And I was supposed to fly to a studio in Atlanta to do the voice recording for this, and I couldn't fly. So they said, Leigh, we're very sorry. We're going to have to get a professional actress to read this. I think they were even going to get a man. I said, over my dead body. So I said, I'll tell you what, I need to do this in my own voice. So I bought a Yeti microphone, and I said, awesome. I will use whatever software is necessary, because it's my orange right here is to use my own voice to read my own book. Yes. I mean, because it's so personal. I couldn't imagine some, actor or actress reading it. So that was my own personal negotiation.
I love that story. And now you're perfectly equipped for podcasting because you have the full audio set up. I love it. I want to do a quick speed round with you before we wrap. So we ask every guest these questions. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. First one, what makes you feel brilliant?
When I can help a woman find her strengths and use them, that makes me feel brilliant. And I'm surrounded by so many brilliant women who don't think they have those strengths.
Awesome. What's your favorite time-saving or productivity hack?
Never work with a blank page. Never work with a blank page. Write everything down, no matter how ridiculous it seems, because then you have something to work with on day 2.
What have you learned to say no to?
I've realized that I'm more of a producer, less of a consumer. So I don't do book reviews. I love people who write books, but I want to spend my time writing a book. I don't want to do a book review. And I'm embarrassed to say I don't do book clubs. I want to be the writer. That's terrible for me to say, but that's the truth.
What's one dream that you're chasing today?
You're not going to believe that I'm saying this. I want to ride my bike in every state. I'm up to about 26 right now, maybe slightly less, but I want to ride my bike in every state.
I love it. Okay. What's the song you turn on when you need to get in the zone?
Really embarrassing. There's a not well-known old school disco song by Edwin Starr called Happy Radio. And look it up, 1979, Edwin Starr. And he basically wakes up in the morning, he turns on his radio and he starts dancing around the room. And that's what I do.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for being with us today. You are delightful. And I know everyone listening has learned something really specific they can take away. So thanks for being with us.
I'm thrilled to be here. Absolutely thrilled. Thank you.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.